To understand Keynesian economics, we have to understand classical economics, and in particular, classical macroeconomics prior to the Great Depression. And that's what we're going to do here in this video, John Maynard Keynes and the too slow self-correction. In the classical view, an economy can get off track. Here we see that the equilibrium within this outcome, within this setting, is showcasing quite a bit of unemployment. We're going to be below our potential output here. So we can get off track, we can get off kilter. But what happens is the economy self-corrects. In this case, the economy would self-correct by moving the short-run aggregate supply curve out, right? And how does that happen? Well, when we end up in a rough situation where we have lots of unemployment, resource prices fall, in particular wages. And a decrease in resource prices increases the short-run aggregate supply curve, and it could push it out until we get back to our long-run output, right? So we get back to that long-run aggregate supply. Sure, our price level may be lower than where it was with this equilibrium, but we end up back at full employment and our potential output is restored. So the economy can bounce back all by itself, self-correcting because the price mechanism adjusts the economy. We could even add other little elements to the self-corrective mechanism. We can say that if we were in a situation where we did not have a central bank control over all interest rates, that during a time of economic recession and hardship, that the demand for investment would fall, which would cause the demand in the loanable funds market to shrink, which would reduce interest rates. And what lower interest rates do is it moves aggregate demand out. And so we could see this kind of increase in aggregate demand, and that could keep going until the economy potentially self-corrected all the way. In modern economies, though, we see the Federal Reserve or the central bank of the country controlling the interest rates, so we really have to rely on the short-run aggregate supply curve shifting out to short-run aggregate supply 2. And this is the classical kind of view as to what will happen. In the long run, the economy self-corrects. The price system adjusts us back to the full employment long-run aggregate supply curve. And that's where we want our macroeconomy to be. And so, sure, we might see some problems. We might end up with some unemployment, but we're going to end up moving back out. And it's not going to be that big of an issue, especially if we're creating wealth by engaging in international trade and all this stuff. These short-run fluctuations aren't really the concern. And while this story is great and it gives us some hope that we don't even have to do anything and the macroeconomy will bounce back, it'll create stability, we have John Maynard Keynes coming in and trying to explain the Great Depression then. Classical econ is fine up until this point, but the Great Depression is massive. We have mass unemployment for over a decade. We have unemployment reaching levels of 25%. Keynes is going to try and come up with an explanation as to what the heck is happening here. He did not think that price changes and the adjustment of the macroeconomy would happen in the classical fashion, where we have this self-correction. Classical economists believed that markets would adjust quickly enough and direct the economy back towards full employment. But when we see the Great Depression, we have to seriously question the self-corrective mechanism. The Great Depression is just too large of an event. This is where we really get the technical creation of macroeconomics as a separate field of study. Keynes comes in and says, wait, we have to answer these macroeconomic questions. Could our overall economy get stuck in a situation where we don't have full employment, where self-correction is not happening? So given this tremendous and horrendous economic phenomena, the Great Depression, Keynes becomes the central figure, and we get Keynesian macroeconomics. And what we do is we come out of this and we say, well, we have this desire to explain the Great Depression. How could this happen? How could this economic disease happen to our macroeconomy? And then we also want to say, well, what can we do about that, given that it happened? We have a desire to be able to do something about that problem. How could we cure the disease? And this is what we will try to focus on. First up in our lecture series, we'll look at how does this even happen? And then next, we will think about, well, what can we do about it once it has happened? Keynes creates a theory that creates macroeconomics as a field, and it fills these two desires. Keynes gives us an answer to how the Great Depression could happen. And Keynes gives us a solution as to what can we do once the disease has actually hit. John Maynard Keynes was an individual who accepted a lectureship at Cambridge in economics that was personally funded by Alfred Marshall. Alfred Marshall you might know of as the guy who basically helped us bring together the supply and demand of basic microeconomics. And Keynes goes on to revolutionize economics as a field. His magnum opus is widely known. It is the general theory of employment, interest, and money. Often people just refer to it as Keynes's book, but in 1936, this really created the field of macroeconomics. It revolutionized what we did in economics. Historians agree that Keynes influenced the United States President Roosevelt's New Deal, but disagrees to what extent. The ideas were all abuzz during the Great Depression. Keynes laid the foundation for the branch of economics termed macroeconomics today. He has a lasting legacy in the world of economics, unparalleled in the 20th century. So that's our introduction to John Maynard Keynes and the too slow self-correction. We basically have two stories now. There's a desire to explain the Great Depression, given that the self-corrective mechanism isn't working, and then also a desire to do something about it. First up, let's continue on with this desire to explain the Great Depression. Click on the videos to continue on.